A boy walked up to the farmer and said, "I can help your bull." No one saw the ending coming. Jack Morrison had been a cattle farmer for 43 years, and he'd seen just about everything the land could throw at him. Droughts that turned the paddocks to dust, floods that swept away fences and livestock, bushfires that painted the sky orange and filled the air with ash. But nothing had prepared him for this. Watching his prize Brahman bull and king lying in the barn, unable to stand, slowly dying despite everything the vet had tried. King wasn't just any bull. He was the foundation of Jack's breeding program, worth more than Jack's house and truck combined. More than that, King had been a gift from Jack's late father, the last living connection to the old man who'd taught Jack everything about farming. Losing King felt like losing his father all over again. The vet had been out 3 times in the past week. Bloat, he'd said initially, then changed his diagnosis to some kind of systemic infection. Antibiotics weren't working. King's temperature was through the roof. He'd stopped eating completely, and now he couldn't even stand. The vet's last words had been blunt and brutal. "I'm sorry, Jack. Best thing now is to put him down. He's suffering, mate. You know it's the right call." But Jack couldn't do it. Not yet. He'd sent the vet away and spent the past 2 days in the barn, sleeping on a swag beside King, trying everything he could think of, electrolyte drenches, cool water baths to bring down the fever, and feeding grass that King wouldn't touch. Nothing worked. The bull was fading, and Jack was running out of hope. It was mid-afternoon on a scorching January day when the boy appeared. Jack was in the barn, stripped to his singlet, sweat pouring down his face as he tried once again to get King to drink. He didn't hear anyone approach over the sound of the cooling fans he'd set up. "Mr. Morrison?" Jack turned to see a kid standing in the barn entrance, silhouetted against the harsh Australian sun. Couldn't be more than 11 or 12, thin as a rake, wearing clothes that had seen better days. Jack recognized him immediately. Tommy Chen, one of the orphans from St. Mary's home in town. "Tommy, what are you doing out here, mate?" "It's 8 kilometers from town." "Walked. Heard in town that your bull's sick, that he's dying." Jack felt his jaw tighten. Of course the whole town knew. In a place like Karatha, everyone knew everyone's business. He turned back to King, not wanting the boy to see the emotion on his face. "Yeah, well, not much to be done about it now. You should head back before it gets any hotter." Tommy didn't leave. He walked further into the barn, his footsteps quiet on the dusty floor. He moved around to where he could see King properly, and Jack saw the boy's face change, saw genuine concern replace curiosity. "He's beautiful. My dad had Brahmins. Before." The boy's voice trailed off. Jack knew the story. Same as everyone in town, Tommy's parents had been farmers too, killed in a car accident 3 years ago. The boy had no other family, so he'd ended up at St. Mary's. Tragic story, but there were a lot of tragic stories in farming communities. "I'm sorry about your folks, Tommy, but like I said, there's nothing. I can help your bull." Jack stopped what he was doing and looked at the boy properly. Tommy wasn't looking at him. He was looking at King, studying the animal with an intensity that seemed odd for a kid his age. "Tommy, mate, the vet's tried everything. If Doc Henderson can't fix him, I don't reckon. My dad taught me things about cattle before he died. I know what's wrong with your bull." The certainty in the boy's voice made Jack pause. There was something in Tommy's expression, something that reminded Jack uncomfortably of his own father, that look of someone who knew animals on an instinctive level. "All right then, what do you reckon is wrong with him?" Tommy walked closer to King, moving slowly and carefully. The bull's eyes followed him, but King didn't try to lift his head or show any sign of alarm. The boy knelt in the straw beside the massive animal and placed his small hand on King's shoulder. "He's got hardware disease. There's metal in his stomach. It's gone through into his heart area. That's why the antibiotics aren't working. They can't fix the damage." Jack felt his stomach drop. Hardware disease. When cattle swallowed metal, nails, wire, bits of fence, and it punctured through their stomach lining. It was a death sentence once it got bad enough, and the symptoms matched what King was showing. How could you possibly know that? His breathing, the way he's lying, the fever that won't break, and Tommy leaned closer to King, pressing his ear against the bull's chest, listening. There's a sound, like clicking. That's the metal moving when his heart beats. Jack had been a farmer for 4 decades, and he'd never heard of a kid diagnosing hardware disease by listening to a bull's chest. But something about the way Tommy spoke, the calm certainty in his voice, made Jack want to believe him. Even if you're right, there's nothing we can do. Surgery's not an option, and the magnet treatment only works if you catch it early. King's too far gone. Not surgery. Old way. My dad showed me once. On one of our bulls. It worked. What old way? Tommy looked up at Jack, and for the first time since entering the barn, there was uncertainty in the boy's eyes. You have to trust me, and you have to help me. I can't do it alone. Jack looked at his dying bull, then at this scrawny orphan kid claiming he could save an animal worth $50,000 using some method Jack had never heard of. Every rational part of his brain said to send the boy home and call the vet back to put King down humanely. But desperation makes people do irrational things. What do you need? The relief that flooded Tommy's face was palpable. He stood up, suddenly all business. First, we need to get him on his feet, just for a minute. I know he can't stand on his own, but we need to prop him up. Tommy, he weighs over a ton. There's no way. Your tractor, we can use straps under his belly, lift him with the front-end loader, just enough to get him upright. Jack had used that method before to help downed cattle, though never one as sick as King. But if Tommy's plan had any chance of working, they'd need to try. He went to get the tractor while Tommy gathered straps from the barn wall. It took 30 minutes of careful work to get the straps positioned under King without causing more distress. The bull groaned but didn't fight them, too weak to do much more than lie there. Jack maneuvered the tractor into position, attached the straps to the loader, and began to lift. King's massive body rose slowly, his legs dangling uselessly at first. But as the pressure came off his side, the bull's instincts kicked in. His legs straightened, taking some of his own weight, and suddenly he was standing wobbly, supported by the straps, but standing. Good. Now hold him there. Don't let him down yet. Tommy disappeared from view, moving behind King. Jack heard the boy doing something but couldn't see what. King's eyes were wide, his breathing labored, but he stayed relatively calm, as if he understood they were trying to help. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 minutes, Tommy reappeared, breathing hard, his hands covered in something dark. Jack's stomach turned, but before he could ask what the boy had done, Tommy was giving more instructions. Slowly lower him down, gently. Let him lie on his left side, not his right. Jack operated the tractor carefully, easing King back down to the barn floor. The bull settled with a grunt, and Tommy immediately moved to his head, stroking the broad forehead, murmuring words Jack couldn't quite hear. "What did you do? What was that?" Tommy looked up, and Jack saw exhaustion in the boy's young face. Old farming technique. When metal gets stuck in the reticulum, that's the second stomach, sometimes you can shift it by manipulating from the outside. Through the rectum. My dad called it internal repositioning. It doesn't always work, but when the animal's this far gone, it's the only chance. Jack had heard of the technique, vaguely, from old-timers. Livestock handlers in the days before modern veterinary medicine had developed all sorts of methods that sounded barbaric but sometimes worked. He'd never seen it done, never thought he'd see a 12-year-old kid attempt it, and you think that worked. You think you moved the metal away from his heart? Won't know for sure until tomorrow, but his breathing's already easier. Look. Jack did look. King's sides were rising and falling more steadily, less of that labored, painful wheeze. It could have been wishful thinking, could have been the bull finally giving up the fight. But there was something different in King's eyes. Less pain, more alertness. We need to keep him quiet tonight. No stress. And we need to get fluids into him. He's severely dehydrated. Tommy spoke with an authority that seemed impossible for someone his age. Jack found himself taking orders from a kid, and stranger still, it felt right. They spent the next hour working together to set up an IV drip, something Jack kept on hand for emergencies, and getting it into King's neck vein. Tommy's hands were steady, his movements confident. As the sun began to set, painting the barn in shades of gold and orange, Jack sent Tommy to wash up at the outside tap while he stayed with King. The bull was resting more comfortably. His breathing definitely improved. Jack allowed himself a tiny spark of hope. When Tommy returned, clean but still wearing those worn-out clothes, Jack realized he had no idea when the boy had last eaten. "When did you last have tucker?" Tommy shrugged, not meeting Jack's eyes. "Had breakfast at St. Mary's this morning. It's nearly 6 o'clock now. Come up to the house. I'll make us something. I should get back. Sister Margaret will be worried. I'll ring her. Come on." Jack's homestead was modest, a weatherboard house his grandfather had built in the 1930s, kept clean but showing its age. His wife Sarah had died 7 years ago, cancer, and Jack hadn't had the heart to change much since. The kitchen still had her curtains, her recipe books on the shelf, her apron hanging on the hook. He made spaghetti bolognese, simple but filling, and watched Tommy eat like he hadn't seen food in days. Maybe he hadn't, not proper food anyway. Jack knew St. Mary's did their best, but they were always short on funds, always struggling. "Tell me about your dad. How'd he know so much about cattle?" Tommy looked up from his plate, tomato sauce on his chin. "He grew up on a station in Queensland. His dad, my grandfather, was a stockman, real old school. Dad learned everything from him, all the old ways, the things people don't do anymore because they've got fancy equipment and drugs. And he taught you. Started teaching me when I was 7. Said it was important to know how to read animals, how to understand what they're telling you even when they can't speak. Cattle, horses, sheep, they all communicate if you pay attention." The boy's face clouded over. "We were going to expand our operation. Dad had saved up to buy more land. Then the accident happened and—" Tommy pushed food around his plate, not eating anymore. "Social services came and took me to St. Mary's. They sold our property, put the money in a trust I can't touch until I'm 18. 6 more years of being stuck in that home." The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut. Jack understood. He'd grown up on this land, couldn't imagine being forced to leave it, to live in town surrounded by concrete and rules. "You miss it?" "The farm, every single day. I dream about it sometimes, wake up thinking I'm in my old room, that I can hear Dad moving around in the kitchen. Then I remember where I am and—" The boy's voice cracked. Jack looked away, giving Tommy privacy for his grief. They finished eating in silence, both lost in their own thoughts about the people they'd lost and the lives that had been taken from them. After dinner, Jack drove Tommy back to St. Mary's, promising to ring in the morning with news about King. Sister Margaret met them at the door, clearly relieved to see Tommy safe, but also stern about him disappearing without permission. "This boy's been nothing but trouble lately, Mr. Morrison. Running off, missing meals, staying out past curfew. I don't know what to do with him. He saved my bull's life today, sister. Or he might have. Won't know for certain until tomorrow. But what he did was remarkable. The boy's got real skill with animals." Sister Margaret looked surprised. Then her expression softened as she looked at Tommy. "That right? Well, I suppose that's something, but you still need to tell us before you go wandering off, Tommy. We worry." Jack drove home in the darkness, his mind churning. When he got back to the barn, King lifted his head at the sound of footsteps, actually lifted his head, something he hadn't done in days. Jack's heart leapt. Easy, mate. Easy now. He checked the IV, checked King's temperature with the thermometer, down 2 degrees. Still high, but definitely improving. King's eyes were brighter, more focused. He even made a sound, a low rumble that could have been complaint or greeting. Jack slept in the barn again that night, but this time he actually slept instead of lying awake in dread. When he woke at dawn, the sight that greeted him made him think he was still dreaming. King was standing, not fully, not strongly, but the bull had gotten his front legs under him and was propped up, munching slowly on hay from the rack. When he saw Jack, King made that rumbling sound again, and Jack could swear there was reproach in it, as if the bull was annoyed at having been so sick. "You bloody beauty, you absolute beauty." Jack rang the vet immediately. Doc Henderson arrived within the hour, took one look at King, and just shook his head in amazement. "I'll be damned. What did you do?" Jack explained about Tommy, about the hardware disease diagnosis, about the old technique. Henderson examined King thoroughly, listened to his chest, took his temperature. The clicking's gone. Whatever that boy did, he shifted the metal away from the heart sac. Temperature's still elevated, but coming down. "I'd say your bull's going to make it, Jack. Against all bloody odds, he's going to make it." After the vet left, Jack sat on a hay bale and just stared at King. A 12-year-old orphan had done what a qualified veterinarian couldn't. Had saved not just a bull, but saved Jack from having to put down the last living link to his father. He thought about Tommy, stuck in that orphanage in town, desperate to be on a farm again, losing himself in the only thing that connected him to his dead parents. Jack thought about his own empty house, his silent meals, his lonely days with no one to share the work or the worry. An idea began to form. Crazy, probably impossible, definitely complicated. But the more Jack thought about it, the more right it felt. The next morning, Jack drove into town and went straight to the Department of Family Services. The woman behind the desk, Carol Brennan, had been there for 20 years and knew every fostering and adoption case in the region. "Jack Morrison, haven't seen you in here since Sarah passed. What can I do for you? I want to inquire about fostering or adopting. I'm not sure which is the right term." Carol's eyebrows shot up. Jack Morrison, the gruff widower who barely spoke to anyone in town, wanting to foster. "That's wonderful, Jack. Are you thinking about a younger child, or Tommy Chen, the boy at St. Mary's? I want him to come live with me." Carol's expression shifted from surprise to concern. She pulled out a file, flipped through it, then looked at Jack seriously. "Jack, I need to be straight with you. Tommy's not an easy placement. He's been at St. Mary's for 3 years, and we've had 4 families try to foster him. None lasted more than 6 months. He runs away, refuses to follow rules, gets into fights with other kids. The last family said he was unmanageable because he doesn't belong in town. He's a farm kid. He needs open space, needs to work with animals. Put a racehorse in a dog kennel and wonder why it goes mad. That's what you've done to Tommy." Carol leaned back in her chair, studying Jack carefully. "You've given this serious thought. Tommy saved my prize bull's life 3 days ago using techniques I've never seen. The boy's got real talent, Carol. More than talent, he's got calling. His father was teaching him, and then that got ripped away. Now he's stuck in an orphanage in town when everything in him is crying out to be on the land. And you think you can handle him, a 12-year-old boy with behavioral issues. I think he's got grief issues, not behavioral ones. I think he needs purpose and space, and someone who understands what he's lost. I can give him that." Carol was quiet for a long moment, then pulled out several forms. "All right, but Jack, fostering isn't simple, especially at your age. You're 64. There'll be home inspections, background checks, interviews. The process takes months, sometimes longer, and Tommy has to agree to it too. We can't force a placement if the child objects. I understand. Whatever it takes." Over the next few weeks, Jack began the process. Social workers came to inspect his home, asking questions about his health, his finances, his plans for Tommy's education and well-being. Jack answered honestly. He was healthy, the farm was profitable, and there was a good school in town that bussed rural kids in daily. Meanwhile, he brought Tommy out to the farm every weekend. They worked with King, who was recovering steadily, putting on weight and growing stronger each day. They checked the other cattle, mended fences, cleaned out water troughs. Jack taught Tommy to drive the tractor, and Tommy taught Jack some of the old techniques his father had shown him for reading cattle health. They didn't talk much at first. Both were men of few words, more comfortable with action than conversation. But gradually, as they worked side by side under the harsh Australian sun, a bond began to form. Jack saw in Tommy the son he'd never had, and Tommy saw in Jack something he'd been desperately missing, a father figure who understood his language. It was during one of these weekends that Tommy asked the question Jack had been dreading. "Why do you keep bringing me out here? Sister Margaret says you're doing some kind of assessment, but that doesn't make sense. You're not a social worker." They were sitting on the fence rail, watching the cattle graze in the distance. King was among them, fully recovered. Once again, the magnificent animal he'd been before his illness. "I'm trying to foster you, Tommy. Adopt you, if you'll have it. I've applied through the department." Tommy went very still. His hands gripped the fence rail so tight his knuckles went white. "You want me to live here? With you? On the farm? If you want to. No pressure. But I figure we could help each other out. I'm getting older, need help running this place. And you need to be on the land, doing what you were born to do. Seemed like it might work for both of us." Tommy didn't respond. Jack risked a glance at the boy and saw tears streaming down his face. The kid was trying desperately not to make any sound, but his shoulders were shaking. "Hey, it's all right if you don't want to. I know I'm not your dad, can't replace him. Just thought, I want to." Tommy's voice was choked, barely audible. "I want to so much it hurts. But what if they say no? What if something goes wrong and I have to go back to St. Mary's? I can't hope for this and then lose it." Jack put his arm around the boy's thin shoulders, and Tommy collapsed against him, crying in a way that suggested he'd been holding it in for 3 years. Jack held him, this orphaned kid who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who'd lost everything and was terrified to hope for anything. "We'll do everything right. Follow all their rules, tick all their boxes. And Tommy, even if it takes time, even if there are obstacles, I'm not giving up. You hear me? I'm not walking away." The approval process dragged on for 3 months. There were meetings with psychologists, assessments of Tommy's well-being, reviews of Jack's suitability. Some officials were concerned about the age gap, about Jack's ability to parent an adolescent, about whether this was just a convenient labor arrangement rather than genuine care. But Tommy's behavior at St. Mary's had completely changed. He followed rules, helped with chores, got along with other kids. Sister Margaret testified that whatever Jack Morrison was doing, it was working. The boy had hope again, and it showed. Doc Henderson wrote a letter supporting the application, explaining how Tommy had saved King and demonstrating medical knowledge beyond his years. The school Tommy attended sent reports showing improved grades and better social interaction. Even the families who'd previously fostered Tommy were contacted, and they admitted the problem had been the environment, not the boy. He'd been desperate to be on a farm, and they couldn't provide that. Finally, on a Friday in August, Carol Brennan rang Jack with the news. "It's approved. Tommy can move in with you starting next weekend. We'll do monthly check-ins for the first 6 months, then quarterly after that. But Jack, he's yours. Well, legally he's a foster placement, but he's yours." Jack had to sit down. He'd hoped, but part of him hadn't believed it would actually happen. The system didn't usually favor single older men, but somehow, against the odds, it had worked. When he told Tommy that weekend, the boy didn't cry this time. He just smiled, the first real smile Jack had seen on his face, and said 3 words. "When can I move in?" "Next Saturday. We'll get your room sorted. Make sure you've got everything you need. Carol says you can bring whatever you want from St. Mary's. I don't have much. Just photos of my parents and a few books." "That's fine. We'll get you new clothes, school supplies, whatever you need. This is your home now, Tommy, for as long as you want it." The following week passed in a blur of preparation. Jack cleaned out the spare room, Sarah's sewing room that hadn't been used in years, and painted it. He bought a new bed, a desk, bookshelves. He went to town and bought clothes in sizes he had to guess at, school supplies, toiletries. The house that had been so quiet for so long was about to have life in it again. On Saturday morning, Jack picked Tommy up from St. Mary's. The boy had one small duffel bag containing everything he owned. Sister Margaret hugged him goodbye, made him promise to visit, and pressed a small crucifix into his hand. "You be good for Mr. Morrison, you hear? And remember, we're always here if you need us." Tommy nodded, but Jack could see the boy was holding back tears again, not sad ones this time, but the overwhelming emotion of finally getting something he desperately wanted. The drive back to the farm was quiet. Tommy stared out the window at the passing landscape, drinking in every tree, every paddock, every stretch of red earth like he'd been starved of it. When they pulled up to the homestead, he was out of the ute before Jack had even turned off the engine, looking around with an expression of pure joy. "It's really happening. I'm really here. You're really here, mate. Come on, I'll show you your room." Tommy's reaction to the room was everything Jack had hoped for. The boy stood in the doorway, taking in the fresh paint, the new bed with its blue quilt, the desk positioned by the window overlooking the paddocks, and the bookshelf Jack had filled with books about cattle farming, animal husbandry, and a few novels he thought a 12-year-old might enjoy. "This is mine, all yours. You can decorate it however you want, change anything that doesn't suit, make it your space." Tommy walked slowly into the room, running his hand along the desk, sitting on the bed to test it, looking out the window at the view. Then he carefully unpacked his duffel bag. Photos of his parents went on the bedside table, a wedding photo, a family photo, with a much younger Tommy grinning between them. His books, worn and well-read, went on the shelf. The crucifix from Sister Margaret hung on the wall beside his bed. "There's one more thing," Jack said from the doorway. "Come with me." He led Tommy out to the barn, where King was standing in his stall, looking magnificent and healthy. But it was the pen next to King that made Tommy stop in his tracks. Inside was a red heifer calf, maybe 6 months old, with a white face and bright eyes. "She's yours. Every kid on a cattle farm needs their own first calf. You'll raise her, train her, and when she's old enough, she'll be the start of your own herd. By the time you're 18 and get access to your trust, you'll have a proper foundation to start your own operation if that's what you want." Tommy stared at the calf, then at Jack, then back at the calf. His mouth opened, but no words came out. "She needs a name. I'll let you think on that. Rosie." Tommy's voice was thick with emotion. "My mum's name was Rose. She loved cattle as much as Dad did. I want to call her Rosie. Rosie's a perfect name." Tommy climbed into the pen and the calf came to him immediately, nuzzling his hand, already trusting. Jack watched the boy's face transform, watched years of pain and loneliness start to ease as Tommy buried his face in Rosie's neck and finally let himself believe this was real. The first few weeks were an adjustment. Tommy had been institutionalized for 3 years, had grown used to strict schedules and constant supervision. The freedom of the farm, the trust Jack showed him, took some getting used to, but gradually they found their rhythm. Tommy did his homework at the kitchen table while Jack cooked dinner. They ate together every evening, sharing stories about their day. Tommy caught the school bus in the mornings, but every afternoon he'd come home and head straight to the barn to check on Rosie and King. Weekends were filled with farm work, and Tommy soaked it up like a plant that had finally found water. The monthly check-ins from family services went smoothly. The social worker noted how healthy Tommy looked, how engaged he was, how his school reports were excellent. Jack's neighbors, initially skeptical about the arrangement, saw the transformation in both man and boy and nodded their approval. It was 3 months into the placement that something unexpected happened. Jack woke one night to strange sounds coming from Tommy's room. He went to investigate and found the boy sitting up in bed, sobbing, clearly in the grip of a nightmare. "Hey, it's all right. You're safe. You're here." Jack sat on the edge of the bed, and Tommy grabbed onto him, crying like he hadn't allowed himself to cry since that first day on the fence. "I dreamed they were making me leave, that it was all a mistake and I had to go back to St. Mary's." "I can't go back, Jack, I can't. You're not going anywhere. This is your home. I'm not perfect, probably made 100 mistakes already, but I'm not sending you back. You're stuck with me, mate." Tommy held on tighter, and Jack realized the boy had been carrying this fear the entire time, afraid to fully settle in case it was all taken away again. They sat there for a long time, Jack holding this kid who'd lost so much, until Tommy finally fell back asleep. After that night, something shifted. Tommy stopped being so careful, stopped acting like a guest. He left his footy boots by the door. He raided the fridge without asking. He argued with Jack about whose turn it was to feed the chooks. He acted like a normal 12-year-old kid, and Jack had never been more pleased. 6 months into the placement, Carol Brennan came for her quarterly check-in. She spent time talking to Tommy alone, asking him the standard questions about how he was being treated, whether he felt safe, whether he wanted to continue the placement. When she finished, she called Jack into the kitchen while Tommy was out with Rosie. "Jack, I've been doing this job for 20 years, and I've never seen a turnaround like Tommy's. That boy is thriving. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I'm just giving him what he needed. A place to belong, work that matters, animals to care for. You're giving him more than that. You're giving him family." Carol paused, then pulled out a document. "I shouldn't tell you this yet, but Tommy's been asking about adoption. Proper adoption, not just foster care. He wants to know if that's something you'd consider." Jack felt his throat tighten. Fostering was temporary, could be revoked. Adoption was permanent, legal, binding. Tommy would become his son in the eyes of the law. "I'd consider it, more than consider it. I'd want it. Then I'll start the paperwork. Fair warning, it's even more intensive than the fostering process, but I don't see any reason it wouldn't be approved." That evening, Jack and Tommy sat on the veranda watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. King grazed in the near paddock, fully recovered and magnificent. Rosie was beside him, growing steadily, already showing signs of the fine cattle she'd become. Carol said, "You've been asking about adoption." Tommy looked at his feet, suddenly shy. "I know foster's probably enough. I don't want to push or make you feel obligated or anything, but I just thought, if there was a chance, I want to adopt you, Tommy. Want you to be my son, legal and proper, if that's what you want." Tommy's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "Really? You mean it? Never been more certain of anything. You've brought this place back to life, brought me back to life. Your family, mate. Time to make it official." Tommy launched himself at Jack, hugging him so hard it knocked the breath out of the older man. Jack hugged back just as fiercely. This boy, who'd walked into his barn and saved his bull and, without knowing it, saved Jack too. The adoption was finalized 8 months later. Jack Morrison officially became Tommy Chen's legal father, and Tommy took the Morrison name. They celebrated at the local pub, with half the town turning up, everyone wanting to congratulate them. Even the families who'd previously fostered Tommy came, apologizing for not understanding what he'd needed. But the real celebration happened back at the farm, just the two of them. They stood in the barn with King and Rosie, and Jack presented Tommy with a document. "This is the deed to the East Paddock. 40 hectares. It's yours. We'll run your cattle separate from mine. Build up your herd properly. By the time you're 18, you'll have a solid operation. If you want to take over this whole place eventually, it's yours. If you want to start your own property somewhere, you'll have the foundation." Tommy stared at the document, then at Jack. "You're giving me land." "A man needs his own land, Tommy. Your father would have wanted that for you, and I want it too. You've earned it, son. Everything you've done for King, for this farm, for me, you've earned it." The word son hung in the air between them, newly legal, deeply meant. Tommy carefully folded the deed and looked at Jack with an expression that held gratitude, love, and something else. Peace. "Thank you. Not just for the land, for everything. For seeing me when nobody else did. For giving me a home when I thought I'd lost that forever. You walked into my barn and said you could help my bull. Nobody saw that ending coming. A 12-year-old orphan saving a prize Brahmin using techniques nobody remembered. But you did more than save King. You saved me from the loneliness I'd wrapped around myself. We saved each other, mate." Years later, people in Karatha would still tell the story of Jack Morrison and Tommy Chen, how a dying bull brought them together, how a grieving man and an orphaned boy became father and son, how Tommy grew up to become one of the finest cattle farmers in the region, known for his uncanny ability to diagnose and treat livestock using both modern medicine and the old ways his father had taught him. But on that evening, standing in the barn with King and Rosie and the setting sun painting everything gold, they weren't thinking about the future or the past. They were just a father and son building a life together, one day at a time, on the land they both loved. And King, fully recovered and magnificent, rumbled his approval as if he knew exactly what his illness had set in motion. Not just his own salvation, but the salvation of 2 lonely souls who'd found family in the most unexpected way.